Our scripture this morning is from Exodus. It tells of God appearing to Moses in a burning bush. Now, in our scripture, as God appears to Moses, God reassures Moses that God does care about his people and knows their sufferings. And he calls Moses to be God's agent in bringing the people to freedom. And faced with this overwhelming experience of a burning bush, Moses puts up obstacles. Who am I to do this? I'm not great enough. How will I know it's your people who called me? What if they don't believe me? I'm not a good speaker. God finally says, I'll put the correct words in your mouth. Moses says, please send somebody else. At which point you get, and this is beyond our scripture, but right after it, you get the sense that God has become a little irritated with Moses' reluctance. And he said, all right, if you don't think you can speak, your brother Aaron is a good speaker. He can speak along with you. And so finally, Moses obeys. So here's the scripture. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight, and see why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then God said, come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. God said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I've also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this very mountain. And here ends the reading. A man was in a cave. He suddenly ran from the cave and climbed up a tree. And then he came down from the tree and ran back into the cave. And then he ran back up into the tree. And this continued for quite some time until someone came by and he asked the man, why do you keep running from the cave to the tree? Well, the man replied, there's a bear in the cave. In that case, why do you keep climbing the tree? Well, because there's a bear up there also. This is the situation Moses found himself in. He could be in two places, neither of which was satisfactory. You remember the story. Moses, having been rescued from the Nile River and brought up as an Egyptian, one day he saw an Egyptian abusing a Hebrew. In fact, the Egyptians were treating all the Hebrews harshly. Had Moses been wise and cautious, he would have done nothing and said nothing. But instead, in a single act of bravery and foolishness, he killed the Egyptian. Afraid he would be found out, he had to flee. He had to flee far from Egypt to a forbidding sort of place called Midian, east of the Nile, east of the Red Sea, middle of the desert. And there Moses, far from the splendor of Pharaoh's palace in which he had been brought up, started a new life, such as it was. He married a young lady. They had a son and named him Gershom, which means alien. So sad was Moses to be away from his people. The only work he could get was to tend the flocks of his father-in-law. To live in Midian meant drudgery and boredom. To return to Egypt meant death. Life held little promise for Moses. Sometimes life seems the same for us. Sometimes it's a major crisis, the job loss or the illness or the letter from the Internal Revenue Service. Sometimes it's something supposedly minor. Maybe back pain or a forgotten appointment or a flat tire. But suddenly the joy of everyday life flees from us. And life seems drab and dreary and dark and dismal. All Moses knew was that back in Egypt, his countrymen and women were being persecuted, and here in the strange, dry, dusty land of Midian, he was but a shepherd, far from the home he loved. But today it all changes. There was Moses, minding his own business, and the sheep presumably, when suddenly a bush was on fire. On fire. But it was not consumed. It was the presence of God himself, revealing himself to Moses in the midst of what anyone would have called a God-forsaken land. But you see, there's really no such thing. There's no such thing as a God-forsaken place, or a God-forsaken time, or a God-forsaken person. What does Moses learn in this encounter? First, he learns that God is a God who claims us, who knows us. He calls us by name. We are not just a statistic or a number, but we are precious to God. And he learns that God has not forgotten his people. I have heard their cries. Moses learns there is no situation that is beyond God's redeeming love, and no person. He learns that the God who claims, the God who comforts, is also the God who calls. Moses, you're the one who will go back to Egypt and deliver my people. Ironically, as I said, faced with this incredible miracle, Moses is reluctant. Moses learns he's not really all that excited to obey God. Let's face it, Moses accepts God's call with all the enthusiasm of a 6-year-old boy receiving a wet kiss on the cheek from ancient Aunt Bertha. God offers possibility and freedom. Moses responds with obstacles. For all his despair at being in exile, could it be that Moses sort of preferred for things to stay as they were? Well, God, I'm not important enough. Well, God, how will they know it is you who sent me? God, how will Pharaoh know you sent me? God, I do not speak very well. Told to lead his people to freedom, Moses just thinks of obstacles. I think this happens sometimes to preachers and churches. We claim to want to do God's will, but actually we prefer to keep things just the way they are. We can't afford it, we can't risk it. We've always done it this way, become the real operating premise, instead of the awesome and wondrous possibilities that God holds out before his people. By the way, I take comfort that Moses was so reluctant. I take comfort in the fact that the greatest hero in Jewish history had doubts, was reluctant sometimes. Because sometimes I'm like that. Sometimes I'm like that. But God still used Moses. And God can still use me. And you. Amen. And us. Back to Moses. Moses learned something else wondrous about God. As God says, I will be with you. What a great promise for my life and yours, and for the church. No, God does not promise to make life easy. In fact, what God calls Moses to do will make Moses' life very complicated. God does not promise to take away all our problems and weakness. But God does promise to be with us. Let's face it, Moses did not suddenly become a perfect person because God appeared to him. But he did finally find the courage to confront the problems facing him and his people. And despite much doubt and disobedience, he found the courage to trust the presence of the leading of God. And as I read this passage, I think that somehow what gets through to Moses are the very first words that God spoke. I have heard the cry of my people. That this God, awesome God, is a God who hears our cries, is a God who understands. Are you in the wilderness? I suppose sometimes we all feel that way. We, like Moses, doubt that God even listens or cares or knows what we're going through. Now, the bad news is I doubt God will make himself known to you through a wondrous experience like the burning bush. Indeed, if we spend our lives looking for or waiting for such an experience, we might be sadly disappointed. But here's the good news. We do not have to wait for a bush to burn to spark faith in our burdened hearts. For you see, God has already made himself known to us through his Son, Jesus Christ. And when we gaze upon the cross, we too experience God's overwhelming love. We too know that God does care. We also know that God is indeed with us always. The burning bush, the experience changed Moses' life from one who ran futilely between cave and tree to one who allowed God to give him strength and direction and courage and hope. As the burning bush transformed Moses' life, the crucified and risen Lord is transforming ours. If you think about it, perhaps the real importance of the burning bush was not so much the experience of it, but the journey that resulted from it. And I wonder if that's not true for us as well. That Jesus died on the cross for us, foundation of our faith. But I wonder if what is as important is the journey that results from that experience. As God takes our weakness, our reluctance, and reminds us that, yes, God can use us to transform the world. The cross is our sign that God does indeed care about us, and a sign that God is always calling us to a new journey in response to the cross. A journey which makes the values of Christ shine brightly again. The journey the cross gives all of us is to live out those values and proclaim those values and bear witness to those values that Jesus taught, those values of forgiveness, reconciliation, mercy, compassion, and peace. And if we're reluctant at first, God is patient with us. Moses threw up obstacles, but Moses finally did what God called him to do. And I think we're all like that. We're imperfect people. But deep down, as we respond to the cross, as we come face to face again with this merciful love given to us, we want to share that merciful love with others. And so, may our lives, our witness, our faith be such that the love, the mercy, the compassion of Christ himself shine brightly through us today. And may it be that everyone we encounter today will learn from us what Moses learned from the burning bush so long ago, that God truly does care. And may we trust that God will always be with us, no matter where our journeys might lead. Trust and obey, number 467.